So, welcome to History 1530 for the remainder of Chapter 3. We have an exam coming up in the near future. In fact, after or concurrent really with Chapter 4, our first exam. Just a reminder of the format. You'll have a week to complete. Exam number 1, there'll be 5 essay questions, 1 per chapter, 4 chapters, right? 4 essays from the 4 chapters and 1 essay question on the current events. So check Blackboard contents, and also if you can go back to some of the Blackboard announcements, there is a list, there are web links to 4 articles. The original intent was to read 1 per week. If you've not, then you have 4 articles to read all at once. And I will take those 4 articles and comprise 1 question from them for your upcoming exam. All right, so if you want to look at what's going on with our course, sorry. How did this up, right? We are U.S. History, there we go. We have a quiz pending. Quiz comes right from the textbook, okay? Sorry, gang. That's in your content. What's in the content? Syllabus, just an image of the textbook. You click on it, nothing happens, but it tells you what book we need. Discussion for video lectures. Yep, that's where you'll find the threads. Each time I do a video lecture, put up a new thread, all found through that link to the forum. The forum is really our classroom, right? Current events articles is there, Chapter 1 PDF, and there it is, the quiz on Chapter 3, right? This video coming at you now will conclude Chapter 3. So keep up with the near weekly quizzes that you'll be getting, right? We'll put out 11 quizzes. There's about 11 weeks left in the semester, and we'll drop the lowest one. So 10 quizzes comprises 20% of your final grade. In each exam, another 20%. 4 exams, 80% plus the quizzes, 100%. Who said I couldn't do math? Okay. Please email me or call me, or during the Zoom meetings, stay on if you can, and you kind of ask me in person. Or feel free to ask me during the class. You don't need to wait until the class is over. We're going to move through Chapter 3, conclude it. We're talking in this lecture, and probably part 2 of this lecture. This is part 1. The English origins of the Puritan movement. Who are the Puritans? They were Calvinists, right? John Calvin actually was a Frenchman. This is a long, convoluted story, perhaps. French lawyer gets kicked out of France, ends up in Switzerland, and proclaims that God saves us because God just chooses us, okay? Through God's grace, we are chosen before we're even born, right? This is a lawyer for you, right? So logical. If God is all-knowing, then God knows before we're even born if we're going to heaven or hell. Predestination. That, for some reason, was an appealing message to the people who heard it, who obviously thought they were among the elect. That's the word, although no one is elected by anyone but God, I guess. The elect were the people who thought they were going to heaven, right? And they tended to be, somewhat privileged in this world. And moderately wealthy, okay, maybe even lower middle class, but business people, who were kind of handsome and healthy and, had some comfort, right? There's a tendency in early Calvinism to blame the poor or the disabled and others, that somehow God doesn't love them, okay? That they're not chosen in this world, how the heck could they be going to heaven in the next, okay? So there was some comfort, almost self-fulfilling comfort in believing you were among the elect. And you needed to show signs of grace, right, to become members of the Calvinist church. So Calvinism takes root in Geneva, Switzerland. It's almost a theocracy under Calvin. It's like government by God's law, at least God's law according to the presbyters, Calvin and the leaders of the church. And that idea moves through Reformation Europe into different nations for different reasons that we just don't have time to go into in the U.S. history course. But it will take root, there, quickly. In the Netherlands, well, the Dutch tended to be tolerant as long as you kept a religion to yourself and made money. In Scotland, Presbyterian Church. In England, the Puritans. Right? And a more radical group of them were the Separatists, whom we know as the Pilgrims. I know, there's a whole lot of names here, folks, okay? So we're talking about the Protestant branch of Christianity, the Puritan sub-branch, or Calvinist, I guess you could say. Puritan is actually in the English version, who wanted to purify the Church of England, right, who thought it was still somehow too Catholic. And then, separating really from the Puritans, we have Pilgrims. Okay? Well, they call them separatists for a reason. They essentially thought that England was a lost cause. Okay? That there's no way to reform England. Let's just get the hell out of there. I'm not sure they were allowed to say hell. They go to Holland, which was even worse, with the Netherlands. They hitch a ride to Massachusetts, right, in 1620, getting the hell out of Europe, I guess, to start a new society. So that's all there, I guess. Or Henry VIII splits from the Roman Catholic Church. King of England starts the really, maybe not technically, but I'm going to say starts the Anglican Church. Mary, his Catholic daughter, persecutes Protestants. Then his other daughter, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I can't go to the blah, blah, blah yet. Mary, his Catholic daughter, we're going back to Catholicism. Then Protestants are going to be prosecuted under Bloody Mary. Okay, some of them move into Europe and pick up on Calvinism. They bring it back. Once Mary is gone, replaced by her sister, the Protestant Elizabeth. Talk about family squabbles over religion, right? So we have this doctrine of predestination. And again, they want to purify the Church of England, which seemed to them too Catholic. Like, why? It was the same buildings, okay? Same glass windows, the Virgin Mary, Jesus on the cross, the priest wore vestments of color, and it just kind of looked the same. Right? They wanted to be pure and, in my opinion, kind of boring. They would argue, say, no, it's very emotional, but they took out, most of the great art out of the church. I'm an art history guy. What can I say? Right? What did the Puritans believe? That Jesus died for our sins, and we were sin. How can a baby sin? There's original sin. You're born with sin, and Jesus' blood washes that away. Okay, God will save you from hell by God's grace alone, but you're chosen before you're born or not, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it doesn't matter how good you are in this life. You were chosen to go to heaven before you're even born. Now that doesn't mean you have license to go out and do bad things. People who are going to heaven would automatically do good things. The Anglican Church, and certainly the Catholic Church, kind of really preach that you earned your way to heaven by doing good things, by doing unto others as you would have done to me, right? The Lutherans, and especially the Calvinists, move away from that. Right? That you don't earn your way to heaven, it's God's gift. Okay? So there's going to be some tension there, right? It's a very emotional, right? But it also tries to, be logical at the same time. Right? It's kind of the tension between emotion and intellect. So the Pilgrims fled England for, we really should say the Netherlands. I know your book uses Holland. Holland was just one state of the bigger Netherlands. Things did not go quite well there, because by this time the Dutch were actually moving in a much, much more tolerant direction than almost anyone else in Europe, except for the Ottoman Turks, who kind of sort of weren't Europe, depending on your geography. They saw no hope for England. Yes, I just said that. They got in the Mayflower. There's about 100 passengers, men, women, children, women who were pregnant, and they're going to start a new life. As their second governor, John Winthrop, will say, "We'll be a city on a hill, shining for all the world to see. We're going to be an example to old England. Can't save old England, but we'll be an example to it." And, initially, it was kind of, they're kind of like the French in the Pays d'Anhalt, which means like kind of where I'm standing in westward from here. There were so few pilgrims. They had to get along initially, only at first, with the Native Americans. Kind of like the Courrier de Bois that we talked about previously. There were so few French trappers and even Jesuits. They had to get along with the natives and vice versa. They kind of needed one another. Keep in mind, by the time the Pilgrims land in Plymouth, or Massachusetts, a disease had already afflicted very, very severely Native American people. So I think we kind of grow up with this myth that somehow the Pilgrims were the first white people on the continent. Well, actually no, because Jamestown was established 13 years before, 12 and a half years before. Although things weren't going that well in Jamestown, Virginia, that is, right? Hundreds and perhaps even thousands of mostly English men and women had come across the Atlantic by 1620, and this colony was struggling to survive. There was such a high death rate, mortality rate. So we kind of end up with this kind of national myth that it's the Pilgrims who are first. No, it wasn't the Pilgrims who were first. There's the people of Jamestown whose colony is going to be based upon selling nicotine, basically selling drugs. I mean, that's not the story we want for the United States. What? A bunch of nicotine sellers of capitalism, that's how we start? Well, if you look at the United States today, you might actually think you want that, maybe not want that, but see that as one of our founding pillars as well, right? Not the Pilgrims. Students always think the Pilgrims came across the Atlantic for religious freedom. Well, that's half true, freedom for themselves, but not freedom for anyone else. You can't be a Quaker and go into the Pilgrim colony or even the Puritan colony later and say, like, I can speak directly to God, I don't need the church hierarchy. Men and women are equal in the eyes of God. And, we should buy land from the natives and sell it instead of taking it, or there should be no war. Those were things that were radical to the Pilgrims. I guess you could say that, I'll retract one thing. The Pilgrims did actually believe men and women were equal in the eyes of God. It's just in human society they were not, right? Men were somehow, hierarchically superior. Okay. So diseases wiped out the First Nations population before the Pilgrims even get there. How? There were other Europeans. There were English and French and Dutch and Portuguese and who knows the nationality of the fishermen and women on the coast of Massachusetts and all through what will later become New England. They're fishing there. They're spreading disease. They're catching cod and they're going home with dried out smoked fish and selling the fish. One historian quipped, I wish I'd come up with this myself. It was more about cod than God, okay? But these fisher folk who were on the shores of Massachusetts, drinking and carousing, that's not the founding myth we want either, so we pick the Pilgrims. It just wasn't that neat and easy, and maybe thankfully so, right? Pilgrims were really religiously fundamentalist and didn't tolerate people of other faiths or beliefs, or certainly the drunk carousers in Marblehead, okay, who were fishing. Right? So, I hate to break your myths there. Right? So, Native people, in some ways need the Pilgrims, there's more Europeans, they're actually going to stay here and not go back with a bunch of fish, after 6 months. They have guns and they have stuff we can use. So, a bit later, the Puritans, right, they were, in a sense, theologically related to the Pilgrims, but not as radical. They thought there was still hope for England. Okay? There is still hope for England. So they're not separatists. They actually seek to reform England or to purify it, to remove it of its kind of Catholic elements. Look, this is anti-Catholic stuff. Right? It's coming out of the chaos and even violence of the Reformation. The Puritans got a charter, like a license from Charles I, and sent over boatloads of people. They actually were kind of smart. Well, actually not kind of. They were smart. They were often business people, educated, and they realized, wow, we heard some bad stories about Jamestown, Virginia. We're not going to make that mistake again. Let's send over some farmers. Let's send over some carpenters. Let's send over, some people who can actually make a colony before the rest of us arrive. Okay? So they were much, much better prepared. Well, they were business people after all. Professionals and craftsmen, I would say farmers as well. And they will, second wave, migrate as families. So you'll see that there's a great rise in population, right? Men and women, both English, even children on some of those early boats. Population will rise through really natural increase as well as continued migration. Here we go with Governor Winthrop. Okay? We're sitting on a hill shining for all to see. So this will kind of lead to an American sense of exceptionalism, like our country should be an example to the rest of the world. Our country, as they said in the Vietnam era, our country right or wrong. Well, that's going to get a nation into trouble, right? No nation is free from sin. Okay? No nation is free from mistakes. So to buy into this kind of myth that the United States is a city on a hill shining for the rest of the world to see, maybe the current zeitgeist has really finally broken that exceptionalism, right? That the nation makes mistakes. That truly exceptional nations are good, great nations. admit their mistakes and try to learn from them, and try to prevent them from reoccurring. Not sure what's so exceptional about enslaving millions of people of African origin, right? So we often are selective in the history we pick to tell stories about ourselves and our nation. There's a communal government, there's a Mayflower Compact, like, whoa, we're outside the charter, we're going to be way outside of, Jamestown, Virginia. What type of government we have? Well, all men who own some property, adult men, can make decisions. So we see kind of an origin of a common government, especially with town meetings. Town meetings weren't as democratic as we'd like to believe. You had to own property. There still was a hierarchy. The wealthy people had a greater say. You had to be a church member. Really, to be in the colony, you needed to be a church member, and you needed to prove inner grace that somehow God had selected you to go to heaven if you were even going to be a church member. So, there we go. Participation was limited to adult male property holders. Whoops. And not everyone owned land. Okay, there's a little chart from your textbook. Most people owned less than 20 acres. You can't make it on 20 acres of land, folks, okay? It's not enough to grow food for your family, so they had to be involved in some trading. Changing landscape to fit the political economy. So it's capitalist, right? So these are business people coming over, and they're engaging in trade. They will actually engage in trade with Old England, eventually things like timber, like really tall pine trees for masts of ships. They believed in property rights. Okay? Individuals own property. Individuals can build fences around their property. No one else is allowed in that property. That's my cow. Don't touch my stuff. Okay? That's not how the native people of Massachusetts had held land communally and shared property. Look, it wasn't some bucolic utopia, but there was a communal sense. This is all of ours to share and to care for. That's going to lead these two people eventually into conflict, right? Commercial hunting is going to lead to the disappearance of the beaver. We talked about that previously. Beaver hats and beaver pelts were in demand. They're going to disappear. Clearing of forest for shipbuilding. There we go. Cut down the big tall trees and send them. Oh, what a job that must have been. Send them back to England for ship masts. There were not too many tall trees left in England by this time. They'd all been cut down really for the last several hundred years. So the native people are going to be pushed into overhunting and desperation. Just not enough land or animals to sustain them. I keep walking to check my timer here. I do not have a camera person, so I'm going to actually hit the pause button here. We'll take a commercial break and we'll come back for part 2, finish up the chapter, and get a little bit of video actually on the Puritans. So take a little break, come back for part 2.